agreed to a high-paying job abroad, but it turned out that I was enslaved. When I first saw the job posting, I thought the universe had finally thrown me a bone. Exciting international opportunity. No experience required. $5,000 per month plus free accommodation and travel expenses. I was 24, stuck in an unpromising retail job and drowning in student loans. The idea of escaping to a sun-drenched city abroad, earning a salary I could only dream of, was like winning the lottery. The interviews were strange, looking back. They were conducted exclusively via WhatsApp with a recruiter called Samantha, whose profile picture was a stock photo of a smiling woman in a blazer. The questions were vague, and she seemed more interested in whether I had a valid passport and could leave within 2 weeks than in my actual qualifications. But when the offer letter arrived, with a glossy PDF application and electronic signature, I didn't hesitate. 10 days later, I was on a plane to a country I had only seen in travel videos. The company organized everything: the flight, the apartment in a modern high-rise building, and even the driver who was waiting for me at the airport. I remember looking out of the taxi window at the sparkling horizon and thinking, this is it. I've made it, but the illusion cracked almost immediately. The luxury apartment turned out to be a shared space with 3 other girls, one of whom had been living there for several months and looked perpetually exhausted. The next morning, instead of being driven to a sleek glass office building, I was dropped off in front of an aging warehouse tucked away in an industrial part of the city. Inside, I was taken to a surprisingly polished office, leather chairs, a glossy desk, and even an espresso machine humming in the corner. The manager, a man named Rami, greeted me with an overly wide smile and handed me a folder labeled 7-Day Sales Internship Program. "We'll make you a top-class salesperson in no time," he said, his grin never quite reaching his eyes. I sat down, clutching the folder as if it were a life raft. The polished office, the confident tone, it was enough to keep the unease from fully sinking in. This could still turn out fine, I told myself. The first day of the internship was, surprisingly okay. I was taken to a small conference room with mismatched chairs and an ancient whiteboard covered in faded marker stains. The air conditioning rattled weakly in the corner, barely holding back the sticky heat of the midday sun. A woman named Lena stood at the front, sharp-eyed and confident, her heels clicking against the cracked tile floor as she paced back and forth. "Sales isn't about the product," she began, her voice steady and sharp. "It's about the feeling. People don't buy what you're selling, they buy the dream you're selling. Make them believe, and they'll empty their wallets willingly." For hours, Lena drilled us on sales tactics, how to sound confident, how to control the pace of a conversation, and, most importantly, how to handle objections. We practiced scripts, role-played calls, and repeated buzzwords like exclusive offer and limited time opportunity until they lost all meaning. The computers were ancient, and the keyboards had that sticky, worn-out feeling from years of nervous fingers tapping away. The air smelled faintly of sweat, instant coffee, and something chemical I couldn't quite place, but I told myself this was just the reality of working abroad. Not every office can look like Google HQ, I reasoned. It was a different country, a different culture. Maybe things just felt rougher around the edges here. On day 2, things shifted. We were handed specific, client lists, people who had allegedly expressed interest in cryptocurrency investments online. Lena instructed us to stick to the script and not to overthink. "These are hot leads," she said, pointing at the lists. "These people are ready to invest. You just need to give them the push." But when I glanced at the names, something felt off. Most of the clients were elderly, with emails like Grandpa 52 at something or Sweet Nana 101. Some had international phone numbers, others had incomplete addresses. When I asked Lena about it, she shrugged. "Don't overthink it. Just make the calls." By day 3, I was making 50 calls a day. My voice was hoarse from repeating the same script over and over again. I'd start every call with, "Hello, this is Sarah from Prime Investment Group. I'm reaching out because we have an exclusive cryptocurrency investment opportunity just for you." Most calls ended with hang-ups or suspicious questions. But every now and then, someone, usually an older voice on the other end, would ask for more details. And when they did, Lena would swoop in. She'd lean over my shoulder, whispering instructions like, "Create urgency. Tell them it's a one-time offer. Make them feel like they'll regret it if they miss out." I felt sick every time I pushed someone toward an investment they didn't understand. Don't worry, Lena said one afternoon, catching me rubbing my temples after a particularly hard call. These people know what they're getting into. It's their choice. But it didn't feel like their choice. The days blurred together, long hours in the dim room, endless calls, the scent of cheap instant noodles during our 5-minute lunch breaks. On the 7th day, something shifted again. Lena walked in with her phone in hand, a tight smile on her face. Congrats, guys. You've completed your internship. Tomorrow, you'll start real client accounts. No more scripts. Real commission payouts. The room was quiet, heavy with something I couldn't name. Be ready. Tomorrow is where the real money starts. That night, I lay in my bunk bed, staring at the ceiling fan creaking above me, and wondered, what exactly am I about to step into? The next morning, there was no van waiting for us. Instead, we were given an address and told to take taxis on our own. The location was even more rundown than the warehouse from the internship. The building sign had been painted over, and the windows were covered with dirty, reflective film. Inside, the air was heavy and stale. The office was bigger this time, with rows of desks separated by flimsy partitions. People, most of them my age or younger, sat hunched over computers, their headsets glued to their ears. I noticed empty energy drink cans scattered on desks, stacks of cheap instant noodles shoved into drawers, and ashtrays overflowing with cigarette butts by the windows. We were greeted by Rami, the manager, wearing a too-tight dress shirt and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Welcome to the real deal, he said, clapping his hands together. No more practice runs, no more safety nets. Today, you're sales agents. You make money or you don't eat. Simple as that. He led us to our desks, each one already set up with a list of clients on the screen. These weren't random names anymore. They were marked with dollar signs and tags like high priority or whale. The script was gone. In its place were guidelines that encouraged us to sound spontaneous and build trust with the clients. The goal was clear: convince people to transfer money to fake cryptocurrency investment accounts. Promise them high returns, exclusive deals, and once they sent the first deposit, convince them to send more. I hesitated on my first real call. The name on my screen was Mrs. Elaine Parker, 68, Florida. Her profile said she had previously shown interest in Bitcoin opportunities. I took a deep breath and dialed. Hello, Mrs. Parker. This is Sarah from Prime Investment Group. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Oh, hello dear, her voice crackled on the line. What's this about now? Bitcoin, you said? I followed the guidelines. I painted a picture of financial freedom, of secure investments, of being able to leave a legacy for her grandchildren. And to my horror, it worked. By the end of the call, she had agreed to transfer $500 to the company account. When I hung up, my stomach churned. Good job. Rami's voice boomed from across the room. See? It's easy. Now, aim higher. Get her to send $5,000 next time. The hours crawled by, each call adding another weight to my chest. Some people hung up immediately. Others cursed at me. But then there were the trusting ones, the ones who believed in the golden promise of easy money. By the end of the day, I had secured 3 deposits. Each one felt like a tiny betrayal. When we were finally dismissed, I asked Marissa, do we ever see the payouts? Like, the commissions they promised? She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Sarah, they'll pay you just enough to keep you coming back. But the real money? That's long gone before it ever touches your hands. That night, I stayed awake, staring at the cracked ceiling above my bunk. I thought about Mrs. Parker, about the other voices I'd spoken to that day. My savings were almost gone, and my return flight home wasn't covered by the company. I was trapped, and every day, the walls felt like they were closing in a little more. By the second week, the routine was suffocating. Arrive early, dial endlessly, push fake cryptocurrency platforms on confused voices halfway across the world. I stopped asking questions. Every day, I repeated the same script, just with different names and dollar amounts. But the cracks started to show. One afternoon, Rami stormed into the office, slamming a laptop shut in front of Marissa. Where's the money, huh? He was ready to invest $10,000, and you lost him. Marissa flinched but said nothing. After Rami walked off, she muttered, that guy was asking too many questions. He was onto us. The next day, a girl named Nina didn't show up. Rumors spread that she'd tried to leave, but Rami had confiscated her passport. When I asked Marissa if it was true, she shrugged. You didn't give them your passport when you arrived? My stomach dropped. I had. It was for security reasons, they said. Payday came and went without any payments. Rami promised it was just a delay in the system, but I noticed Marissa eating plain crackers for lunch again. That night, back in the shared apartment, one of the girls quietly told me about a guy who had tried to leave weeks earlier. He'd managed to escape, but only after sneaking out in the middle of the night with nothing but his backpack. I realized then, no one was coming to save us. By the third week, the shine had completely worn off. The office felt like a pressure cooker, hot, cramped, and filled with the constant hum of desperate voices trying to sound confident over the phone. The air conditioning barely worked, and when it did, it dripped water onto one of the desks, creating a permanent damp spot that no one dared to sit near. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering every few minutes, making everyone's headaches even worse. Weekends? Those didn't exist here. On Friday afternoon, Rami casually announced, "We'll need everyone in on Saturday. Big targets to hit this month. No exceptions." When someone dared to ask about overtime pay, he laughed. Overtime? You're not even getting regular time. I showed up that Saturday morning, barely able to keep my eyes open. My bunkmate, a girl named Alina, had been crying in bed the night before. She hadn't been paid either, and her family back home was waiting for money she couldn't send. The calls didn't stop. There was no lunch break, no moment of silence. Just the constant pressure to close deals. Rami stalked between desks, occasionally slamming his hand on someone's desk if they were underperforming. He berated one guy so viciously that the poor kid removed his headset and just walked out. No one stopped him. I started dreading the mornings, but leaving wasn't an option. My savings were nearly gone, my passport was locked in Rami's desk, and every day, the walls of that dingy office felt like they were closing in on me. By the end of the third week, I developed a persistent cough from the stale air and constant talking. I'd lost weight too. My stomach couldn't handle the instant noodles and crackers we survived on, but the worst was the exhaustion. Calls stretched long into the evening, and every day, Rami would insist we stay, just an hour longer, to hit our quotas. One night, as I dragged myself back to the apartment, Alina whispered to me, "They're never going to pay us, Sarah." Never. And I believed her. The illusion of making big money had been shattered. Now, all I could think about was getting out. I had to leave. Soon, the fourth week felt like a fever dream. The exhaustion, the stale air, the endless calls, it all blended into a fog of stress and hopelessness. By now, the 7-day internship folder felt like a cruel joke. Payday never came. The promises of commissions, bonuses, and freedom were all lies. Rami's patience was wearing thin. He walked around the office like a vulture, hovering over desks, snapping at anyone who hesitated during a call. One guy, barely 20, got screamed at for taking a bathroom break without permission. Worst of all, they started calling us in on Sundays too. No warning, just a group chat message at midnight. Office tomorrow. Attendance mandatory. We weren't people anymore. We were tools. But Marissa's disappearance stayed with me. If she'd made it out, so could I. That week, I stopped caring about quotas or Rami's threats. Every free minute, I was planning my escape. The plan was simple. Lie low. Don't draw attention. Collect what little cash I had left. Sneak out at night. Leave everything behind except essentials. Get to the embassy. But then, Alina caught me stuffing cash into my bra one night. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she said quietly. That I froze. "Take me with you." I hesitated. Alina was weak, tired, and visibly malnourished. But how could I leave her behind? Okay, tomorrow night. Pack light. That final day felt endless. Every call, every glare from Rami, every crackle of the headset felt like it was trying to pull me back in. But when the sun set and the apartment lights dimmed, Alina and I exchanged a glance. No words, just a nod. We grabbed our bags, tiny, barely more than purses, and slipped out into the warm, humid night. We didn't look back. The embassy guard let us in without asking too many questions. The moment the heavy gates closed behind us, I felt like I could finally breathe. We were escorted into a small office where a woman in a navy blue suit offered us water and asked us to explain everything. We told her everything about the fake crypto sales, the unpaid wages, the confiscated passports, and Rami's threats. My voice shook, but I didn't stop until every grim detail was out in the open. The embassy's staff acted fast. Within hours, they contacted local authorities, and someone even managed to track down our passports. It turned out we weren't the first ones to show up with this story. The next day, word came through. The office had been raided. Rami was arrested along with a few others higher up the chain. The so-called Prime Investment Group had been operating under a dozen fake names across multiple countries, all running the same scam. The building where we had spent weeks dialing numbers and ruining lives was shut down. The computers were seized, the desks left empty, and the doors chained shut. Alina and I were given temporary shelter while embassy staff helped arrange our flights home. Sitting in that small safe house, eating my first real meal in weeks, I felt numb. Not relief, not anger, just empty. When I finally boarded my flight back to the US, I stared out of the window as the plane lifted off, watching the glittering lights of the city disappear beneath the clouds. Back home, I tried to settle back into my old life. Friends said things like, "At least you got out," or, "You must have learned so much from the experience." But all I could think about were the voices on the other end of those calls, the people I'd convinced to send their savings into a void. The embassy told us later that Rami and his associates would face serious prison time. But I knew there were more offices like ours, more recruiters named Samantha, and more desperate people like me boarding planes to nowhere. It's been months since I returned. I'm back in retail now, earning barely enough to get by. But at least I sleep at night. If there's one thing I can tell anyone reading this, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And if a recruiter named Samantha ever messages you about a life-changing opportunity abroad, block her immediately.